I'm growing marijuana in my yard. Growing marijuana in my yard. Got little pots of pipe spread out all over the lot, 'cause I'm growing marijuana in my yard. Well, I got the seed from Mexico. Stick it in some dirt and let it grow. Put it in my garden with my peppers and my peas, and I get all the smoke I need to breathe. 'Cause I'm growing marijuana in my yard. Growing marijuana in my yard. We'll keep it where no one can see, so let's keep this between you and me. But I'm growing marijuana in my yard. 'Cause I'm growing marijuana in my yard. I can't tell my boss or I'll get fired. I don't grow much, just what I use. I work all day, and when I'm through, I smoke some marijuana from my yard. Yeah. Now the policeman, he wants to talk to me. He says, how you gonna smoke up all that weed? He says, money's what you're in it for. Don't you know we're in a war? Come go haul your ass downtown with me. I said, hey man, what is it to you? How do I infringe on what you do? Well, I beg your pardon if you're offended by my garden, but I just can't grow Prozac in my yard. So I grow my own medicine in my yard. I give some to my neighbor for his heart. Share it with my grandma and keeps it from her son, 'cause we all know that stuff's against the law. Well, now there's nothing growing in my yard, 'cause cops took all my land and both my cars. Now I have to buy my pot from a teenager in the parking lot who's growing marijuana in his yard. Oh, anyone can grow it in their yard. Think I can show you how, it ain't hard. Never mind the president, let's overgrow the government, and I'll grow marijuana in our yard. Let's grow some marijuana.
Okay, here we are again doing another episode of Pot Talk, and as usual, I want to bring up the fact that too many of our brothers and sisters are sitting in jail for marijuana, and it's time for all you people out there to start putting some pressure on these politicians. We want all the nonviolent marijuana prisoners out of jail, and we don't want any more going in. And now that that's been said, and I've said it many, many times on our show, and we wish you people would get off your butts and start doing something to free these people. There's a lot of people suffering in prisons and in jails who've harmed no one. There's no victim in the marijuana, in the use or even the sales of marijuana. There are no victims. So if there's no victim, there's no crime. Why are our jails full of all these marijuana people? And the drug war in general is a racist drug war, and it was started and used racially, but the whole reason it was really started was to stop the marijuana industry. Farmers were growing it, and it was going to be a boom crop where many farmers would make a lot of money, and the big corporations like DuPont and the drug corporations and the wood paper companies saw that it was a threat to their monopolies, and they saw that instead of all the money going to just a few big corporations, it would be spread out to farmers all across this country, and they couldn't have that, so they used marijuana, the word marijuana, instead of hemp, which everybody, had they started it out as hemp, people would have saw the scam. but they used the word marijuana, so most people didn't know what they were talking about, and they thought it was something else until it was too late. So you people out there better wake up. It's a useful medicine. It was a medicine before they started this, and they knew it, and yet the DEA put it in Schedule 1, which said has no medical value. And they knew that it was in 50% of the pharmaceutical medicines at the time. So everything that the government has told you about marijuana is a lie. Basically, almost everything that the government tells you about anything is a lie. If you believe that marijuana is really harmful, then you really believe that some airplanes crashed into the World Trade Center and the heat from that melted that steel and made that building collapse. Well, you people will believe anything that they tell you, and that's the big problem with America right now.
'Cause we all know that's just against the law. Well, now there's nothing growing in my yard. 'Cause cops call my land and both my car. Now I have to buy my pot from a teenager in the parking lot who's growing marijuana in his yard. Oh, anyone can grow it in their yard. Hey, I can show you how, it ain't hard. Never mind the president, let's overgrow the government and all grow marijuana in our yard. Let's grow some marijuana.
Yes. Yes,
And
yes.
the poisoning, the potential poisoning of the groundwater. And it does not necessarily to be happening within half a year or within a year. Slowly, those fracking fluids, they get pushed through the upper horizons of the rock above. And sooner or later, it might happen in 5 years and in 10 years, that those highly toxic fracking fluids and the methane ends up in the groundwater table.
Right.
And
Now,
what I understood, between 5 and 15% of the methane that's being released through the fracking.
now, fracking is a very big issue in this area right now. So let's approach this very slowly and carefully. And I'm going to start with a little anecdote I know. A girlfriend of mine in the Transcendental Meditation movement. I used to do this spiritual practice, and we went to different parts of the world, and we meditated in India. And my friend Janet Bradbury. We became friends, and we've stayed friends over the years. She inherited a farm with her brothers and sister in Oklahoma. And as it got harder and harder for the farmers, she's told me with great guilt, because she's married to a PhD computer designer in San Diego, and among all of the progressive communities, they all know that fracking isn't good. But she was telling me, Paula, the farmers can hardly stay on, and they're being given these big prices for fracking. And I said, Janet, because I was starting to learn about bank fraud, I said, that seems a setup, because they might offer big bucks to the farmers this year, but if pretty soon you start to depend on that income, what if they lower the price all of a sudden, and you can't meet all of your expenses, and you've forgotten how to farm? That seems like a recipe for disaster.
Well, there's, as I say, there are so many negative factors, that are not being taken into consideration. And what I understand, at least between 5 and 15% of the methane that's being freed, it migrates slowly through the upper layers, and then it's released to the atmosphere. And what I understand, methane is around 100 times more destructive to the ozone layer than
Right.
carbon dioxide.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, in a very simple thing, is if you're a farmer, what is the matter with the economy that a farmer can't produce food that's needed so much, whereas, like you said, fracking would, what were those multiples again? Fracking would bring in how much versus?
Here in the province, I question the the director of the shale gas company about 2.5 years ago, and figures were being thrown out that the provincial government expected about $225 million in royalties annually. So I threw that figure out to this Tom Alexander, and he said, I don't know who has come up with that figure. So I asked him point blank, will it be more, will it be less? And he said, it will be quite a bit less, especially at the start, you know. So I made the other, you know, math about that versus if we start again producing our food.
Well, let's take a Walmart. You know, Walmarts came into this country by starting to offer to the public prices that the local retailers couldn't buy from their wholesalers. And they were going against anti-monopoly laws. Then after they put the retailers out of business because the retailers couldn't compete, then they started to raise their prices. So I would think that the farmers would make less over time if it's in the hands of a monopoly. But now you're saying, what would the figures be if the New Brunswick area, the farmers really had a healthy economy and not this fraudulent cheating economy, and they were not importing food? What would they bring in because it's an agriculture?
As I say, if we, instead of importing 90% of the food, you know, most of it we easily can produce here. That would mean another between $6 and $7 billion in input into the provincial economy. Because it's a known fact, every job in agriculture produces at least 4 to 5 jobs in the surrounding economy.
Right. So we're talking about bringing in billions if you just had a normal, healthy economy, although it's not controlled by big multinational corporations, versus $200 million for this fracking that everybody knows is so questionable. Is that?
And as I say, when the chicken eventually comes home to roost, maybe a few years later, that suddenly the groundwater is polluted with highly toxic fracking fluids and with methane, you know.
Right. Not to mention that you've driven off all the farmers who are self-sufficient, stand up, they have families, and you bring on kind of a slave factory situation. These factory farms are horrendous, and I see them as a direct consequence of what I call the bank fraud, which most people aren't really studying.
A big blame is to be put on the general public. They bought all this pie in the sky that was being given to them, the picture of the pie in the sky that was being given and portrayed to them by the mainstream media.
Randy, I'd like to pause for Randy. She's shaking her head, and I know she knows a lot about mainstream media. Can you comment on this, why the public is also to blame, as what Werner said, because they bought this bill of goods?
I hate to say it, but I have a very judgmental view on some of this. I think the public is so lazy that the fascism, the totalitarianism that we're all talking about, the public lets it happen. They don't, you know, we're only beginning to see some sort of action now by those in support of minority communities who were just being picked off by cops now. But that's even an example of how they don't, the American people don't respond to anything unless it affects them personally. And we've heard about the atrocities of Monsanto for years, and we just keep on re-electing the same Republicans or Democrats because he's my Democrat or he's my Republican. And I don't know what to say about it, except I'm sick and tired of every time everybody is, that if they're asked to sacrifice something for whatever, but that's my convenience, I don't want to sacrifice that. American, and I mean United States citizens specifically, are selfish, and they're taking the rest of the world down that road.
You know, our economy is deteriorating here, Werner, unless people are somehow involved in the benefits of the bank swindle. But Randy, could you at this point talk about what happened at the Christmas dinner? We have a community dinner, so Werner kind of understands our
Yeah.
community. Here in Woodstock, at Thanksgiving and Christmas, the entire community gets together and shares a meal. It used to be in the community center, but now the community center is being remodeled. So this one was at a church, just so you know.
Right. And what was interesting about it was the people that were coming up to me were talking about this station. And this station is dedicated to those who either choose to abstain from the marvels of the internet, or don't want to be bugged, or just want their privacy hopefully left intact. So we try to inform everyone of news and opinions that are not usually found on FM radio. So these people were coming up to me and saying that, oh, well, this is a lifeline. This keeps me sane. I thought I was alone in feeling about this. And they're telling me that they keep it on from when we sign on to when we sign off. And then I ask one of these people, well, if that's the case, why, when we give out the phone number, don't you call? And she said, I don't have a phone. And it made me realize that not only are we trying, and apparently successfully, reaching people that aren't on the internet, we're reaching people that are completely off the grid, and all they have is a radio to hear this stuff. So hopefully we're filling their consciousness with different concepts than the go to this website and buy this concert ticket or all this other junk that goes on. And I was just amazed that there are people that are even more off of the grid than I thought they probably would be.
Right. So basic phone service, Werner, used to be something like, $5 or $6 or, under $10. And now it's over $30. There's some people, maybe they got rid of their landline, they went on their little iPhones, and then through IP address discrimination, they lost that, because cellular telephone bills can be $100 a month. And some people are, that's getting really hard. Well, basic utilities should never be such that you're fracturing the community, because all of these corporations that are offering this service is offering the service ostensibly under a constitution whose mandate is to protect the coherence and the continuity of the community. So I'm hoping that Randy, that this show that we're doing with you, Werner, will become a seed, and that perhaps Randy can play it at other times during the day, and we can, for those people who still have a phone, get some call-ins. We only have one dedicated line, and we're working with you now, so we can't take call-ins.
I appreciate that, Paula. But as I say, in regard to that problem about communications and so, at one time it was a public utility, but over the last few decades, more and more of the public utilities that were owned by the people have been sold out
Right.
to private companies, public-private partnership, So the basically the ones that are working for the government, or that are in the government, that they got more money to blow, and they can force through higher salaries for the bureaucrats and so on.
But that's unlawful. And this whole thing is driven by consent. These are some very, very subtle arguments. For example, you talk about the freedom of information. When I was going through some of, these struggles, I realized that the very process of filling out a form for freedom of information means that you're consenting that they should have this information, instead of saying, what the heck are you doing in my private space? And who is authorizing this? I think we have to get back to some very, very basic questions and not be ashamed of asking these. You definitely, that's why Joe and I love you so much. You're what we call stand up.
But, Paula, you mentioned their basic questions. They receive a paycheck, the public employees, the bureaucrats. They receive a paycheck because they are public servants. How is it acceptable that the servants are allowed to sell off their master's assets.
Randy?
I've never heard it framed quite like that, but it certainly is a good rhetorical question. Don't look to me for an answer because...
It's basically called embezzlement.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And we're too embarrassed to call attention to the fact that we have a missing ass. No, it gets to psychological manipulation. I mean, I've even been doing. I found something marvelous on the internet. 1992, a lady was speaking to the parents about education in Pennsylvania, and she apparently held a very high position in Ronald Reagan's administration, which, you know, my husband tends to be not enthusiastic about Republicans, but I think our problems are just light years beyond Republican and Democrat. And, you know, once you show people the basic problem, I think you have a galvanizing and unifying platform. But what she pointed out is that our education system is run by the Labor Department. In other words, they want to turn out good workers. And somebody like a self-sufficient farmer, it doesn't fit in with this overall, you know, program of cheap labor. It's slave labor.
Well, basically, with globalization, when everything is said and done, they want a mobile workforce. They can send to any part of the world they want, basically like tumbleweeds.
Yeah, no roots, no culture, no ability within the community to communicate with each other. That's why I say I was very touched when Randy told me that story, that there were some people here that are listening to the radio and don't even have a telephone. That's something that, you know, the government people, if you look at all of their mission statements, all of what justifies them getting the funding and things, these people without telephones, really, when you look deeply into the law which funds these federal grants, they are supposed to be the beneficiaries of the trust.
Can I just make a slight clarification here? I'm not exactly sure why the people that were telling me that they don't have a phone, they could be in an area where there's no cell service, which there are plenty of near where this person is talking, or it could be that they don't want to pay the money, or it could just be that, you know, the impression I got was that even though something like us is a lifesaver, it's a lifesaver maybe to people who just don't want to be involved with paying a phone bill or being that connected. I know there are a lot of people who appreciate just not being connected. I'm one of them.
Yeah, but did you always have a landline? Of course, landlines, you got the feeling that if it was tapped, I mean, my husband has had his privacy compromised from day one, but you used to have to get a warrant. You know,
right,
you don't just, and you really still do. I think even with the IP address discrimination, people, just because the technology to spy is very powerful, doesn't mean that you can't take that technology and completely turn it around. My husband always says, the law cuts both ways. So if somebody is snooping in on you, all you have to do is rebut it and challenge and say, you know, get out of my email address, or come forward if I don't own this email address and fess up to me that I don't own it. And admit that you deceived me. If this password, if I'm constantly having my account taken down because I send out too many emails, then that means that password really isn't my password, because you're telling me you closed it down because of a fraudster or a hacker, and I'm telling you you're the hacker, you're the fraudster. But, you know, we want to be polite, we want to be nice, we want to be good citizens, and we think, how can we challenge these people? You learned, Werner, right, with a lot of years and blood, sweat, and tears, you tromped over to the universities, you tromped over to the government people. You even told me once you went into a church and you looked directly at who your research told you was the source of the problem. Can you describe that experience?
I didn't just only do it once, I did it twice.
Describe that.
Well, after, again, so much carnage had been done on my animals, and I thought, aren't there any decent people left in the community that finally have the courage to stand up? So on Sunday morning, I just walked into the local church. The pastor stopped preaching, and I turned around and looked at the congregation and walked back out. And each time the person came out, a member of the congregation, and we had a good long talk, and I explained the situation.
Did that person in the congregation who reached out to you, did he follow up with you?
Well,
or he's
I
afraid?
get the impression there are family connections, and
He would have to betray his class?
to stir up controversy. They don't want to stir up a stink, And as I say, we are well on the way to what's being described in the Bible as the kingdom of the beast.
Yeah.
We are well on the way. But instead of people speaking openly out about, and they could hold those forces at bay, they are so full of fear, they don't
Right.
want to touch it, because they never know where they can get hit. Something nasty might happen to their loved ones, or it might happen to themselves. And it is such a sinister system, what's going on.
Well, maybe it sounds like this is the eternal struggle between good and evil.
Yeah.
And every...
And, there's some people, there's a saying, all it takes for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing.
Right.
And I added to it, and when good people do nothing, then they are not good people anymore.
Right. Right.
Paula, earlier you mentioned about fascists.
Yes.
I did the last 2 or 3 years or 4 years, thanks to the internet. Original archives are now available. I did a lot of research, and I still speak German, and I came across the public addresses and speeches Hitler gave in Parliament and at rallies.